Hey everyone, I'm Julie Gumlock, your host for another episode of the Bespoke Parenting Hour. For those new to this program, this podcast is focused on how parents should custom tailor their parenting style to fit what's best for their families, themselves, and most importantly, their kids. Today, I am excited to have on my friend Christian Toto. He is an award-winning journalist. He's a conservative film critic and a radio show co-host. He also has his own podcast that I won't name. No, I'm kidding. It's called Hollywood and Toto Podcast. He offers the right take on entertainment, and I'm hoping he'll give us the right take today. Christian, thanks for coming on.
That's a lot of pressure now. Come on.
You've got to be right.
That's right.
So, Christian, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how a nice conservative guy like you got involved in Hollywood.
Yeah, a recovering art major. I switched over to journalism, kind of elbowed my way into the entertainment desk on a couple of newspapers. And then I moved from D.C. to Denver, where I am now, and kind of went solo and realized that the vast majority of people who review movies are left of center, and there's no crime in that, but it seems like you could use a right of center voice, and there are very, very few people who do that. So I decided to throw my little hat into the ring in that fashion. And
yeah. It is important. It is important too that perspective be heard, particularly on something cultural like Hollywood and the movies they produce. So, I think a lot of people are glad you're out there.
Yeah, and I think it's more pronounced than ever on two fronts. One is that the people who are reviewing movies are kind of leaning into their left of center biases in ways that they weren't when I first started this business. And also the product in Hollywood is leaning into its biases, which again are similarly left of center and sometimes dramatically so. So, I think that half the country should be represented in the critical phase of things. And that's where I come in.
Well, it's interesting. Since 2006, you've seen sort of this lurch leftward and this, inability to accept any different positions or thoughts. And that is particularly true in Hollywood. Tell us a little bit about Hollywood, like the numbers. Obviously with COVID, we've seen, things released on these streaming services now. Theaters are, some of them are opened. I'd actually like an update on that if you know that. But, how is Hollywood doing in terms of actually selling tickets and selling their products?
Well, before the pandemic, Hollywood was struggling a little bit on this end because they kept rising prices. The numbers weren't awful, but the tickets sold were not what they wanted to see as far as the data goes. And of course, everything shut down with the pandemic, and now the theaters are kind of bouncing back. I think they've bounced back a little more quickly than I imagined, but there's certainly still a gap between the old and the new. A couple of films have done very well, like A Quiet Place Part 2, in part because it's entertaining, but a lot of films have underperformed dramatically, like Cruella. So I think what's happening is that the industry is really changing right now. I think a lot of the studios are thinking, gosh, we can go straight to streaming. We keep more of the revenue. We have more control over the product. We kind of push up our particular streaming channel of choice. And this could be the future. I think that's where what may shake out. I don't know if the theatrical model is going to go away. I don't think so, but I suspect it may be reserved more for the razzle-dazzle blockbuster movies like Black Widow, as opposed to more thoughtful films that are made for adult audiences. So we shall see. It's a work in progress, but the numbers aren't quite there yet. And most theaters, from what I can tell, are open. I think most have rebounded as far as they're not shuttered anymore. But we're seeing some movies that you would think would make X and Y at the box office, making quite a bit less.
I always feel like Hollywood doesn't listen. It doesn't listen to women like me who prefer, don't want these big, sort of CGI, bright lights, loud noise, music, movies. I know this is not going to come as a big shock, but I really like things like Downton Abbey and I mean, that's so old now, and I'm still referencing it because there really hasn't been a replacement for that. And, I know that there have been Bridgerton, and there's some other, Bridgerton wasn't exactly Downton Abbey, but they're trying to repeat that. But why does Hollywood never seem, for instance, Downton was incredibly popular. It's a very safe show to watch with kids. Why is it that they always seem to go? I get it. Blockbusters are very popular, but it does seem like there's other markets out there that they never really are interested in tapping into. Is that true?
Well, I think that Hollywood is really conservative in the worst ways, in that it's very afraid to take risks and chances. So that's why they go with the reboots and sequels and remakes. I think from a theatrical level, something like a Bridgerton, an original presentation, is riskier than Fast and Furious Part 12. But, some of the titles you're mentioning are doing well on the home front. So those are, Downton Abbey is originally a TV show. They did make a movie of it, but that's where it began. And Bridgerton was based on Netflix. So I think that you're seeing sort of a split between interesting stories that speak to different audiences where you can watch them at home, and then what do they kind of create on the theatrical level, which is often big and loud and quite often dumb, honestly.
Yeah.
And I don't mind that at times, but it does kind of rot my brain at other times. But
well, it does. It does. And, you look at the original Star Wars franchise. Now, I know there's a lot of criticism of them, and I know about this whole subculture that thinks that, Hollywood went in the toilet when the Star Wars franchise, came up, and that sort of started the blockbuster, sort of the Hollywood only caring about these big money makers. But, the original franchise did have some major religious and mythological themes, and this idea of truly good and bad, and then as you went further into that series, it was really hard to tell who were the good guys and the bad guys. Will Hollywood ever go back to having, depth? Or are we looking at, should I just, continue to only watch 70s shows now, because it's a future of woke crap that we're gonna have in our future from now on?
Well, the woke argument, I think, is both separate and intertwined with what we're seeing today. So it's kind of hard to tease out at times. But I will say, Star Wars worked because it was just a classic story. It had essential tropes to it. You mentioned good and evil. You mentioned some of the potentially the religious undertones, but it was a well-told story. And I think that Hollywood often struggles to do that, which sounds ridiculous. It's Hollywood. It's what they do. It's their whole purpose. But, in the late 70s, early 80s, they made these 3 wonderful Star Wars films. And then when it came time to reboot them and make new films, the 3 sequels got increasingly worse. With all that money. Listen, Disney owns the franchise now. They have every resource at their disposal to make the greatest stories with the greatest dialogue and the greatest everything, but they care more about the effects, the callbacks, the Easter eggs, the teasing out a new franchise, sort of the synergy and the marketing behind these movies rather than the stories. I grew up on Star Wars. I love those movies. I've seen the last 2 films. If I never saw them again, I'd be very happy. They offered me nothing, zilch, zero. And and I was their audience. I was the guy who grew up in this stuff and wanted to relive my childhood through these movies. And they didn't get there for me, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do think sometimes that with the smaller screen efforts, I think like with Netflix is very good at not letting the studios interfere. They often will let the artists just say what they want to say and do what they want to do. They don't get millions of notes saying, oh, this character must be X or Y, or this storyline is dumb, or you need narration here to explain it to your dumb audience. So I think sometimes the better entertainment often pops up on the smaller screen. And we've seen that with shows like Fargo, which is sensational, Justified, even Sons of Anarchy, as over the top as it is, was just really a rock solid show.
Yeah. I have taken a different tack. And honestly, I feel like I'm going to be all over with this podcast because every time you say something, I want to go off on a different tangent. So I am going to be a little bit all over the place. But I'd mentioned that I'm only watching 70s shows, and you talked about you love these shows, but I don't feel like some of the current content coming out of Hollywood is anything I want to share with my kids. And so I was kind of interested in, because I've been certainly over COVID, I've been playing old movies for my kids, Towering Inferno, Poseidon Adventure, The Great Escape, some really great films of the last, 30, 40 years. And I was wondering if you had any, we can certainly go back to this, but like, what are the kind of films that you watch with your kids? I know your kids are kind of my age kids. They're not, they're still at home. And, I was wondering if we can talk about sort of what you watch with your kids do you watch current television? If so, what do you watch? And also some recommendations for older stuff that you think kids should. I feel like there's things in pop culture that kids should all see. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that.
Yeah, this is an odd topic for me, and it shouldn't be, but my kids are 10 and 12, and they have an odd relationship with movies now. They prefer YouTube shorts and things like that.
Oh, I know.
Sit down for a movie is not their natural state of being. So I have, coaxed them to watch movies like Jaws, which we all loved, and it's essentially just one of the best movies of all time to me. We've also enjoyed What About Bob, which I remember being pretty clean, and the kids just absolutely howled over it. And maybe blame Bill Murray.
We watched that recently.
Yeah, it's very solid entertainment. When I go back to some of the '80s films that I grew up with watching, the Ferris Bueller's of the world, you can't mess with them. I will say that we've been watching in recent months Bob's Burgers on Fox, which is mostly clean. Once in a while, there'll be sort of an elbow or something that's a little uncomfortable, but it's a very sweet story. It's very funny. But one of the revelations for me of late is I've been watching Modern Family, and I know it was a great show, lots of Emmys, blah, 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 11 years. But I'm kind of astounded at how rigorous it was, how it was just a beautifully told story that had a lot of great messaging. And as you watch the later seasons, you can kind of sense the woke culture encroaching on it, but they often process it in ways that you don't expect, or that they actually poke fun at it, kind of acknowledging it and ribbing it at the same time. And I don't even think if you made a show today, you can kind of get away with that. I think it's more, hands off. You can't disagree with it. You can't make fun of it. Another thought is just sort of how the characters, especially the gay couple, Cam and Mitchell, they're deeply flawed. Yeah. They're selfish, they're silly, and yet you love them because they're so real and they're so flawed. Yeah. They're so interesting and layered. And I think it's another area where often with storytellers today, if there's certain groups that are marginalized, that you have to be very careful with what you do and say about them, which only restricts the storyteller. Yeah. Because these are characters that are interesting, and I think they connect with us more because they are who they are, and because they're not immediately lovable and flawless. Yeah, they're odd.
It reminds me of Archie Bunker. What is the show there? I'm forgetting. All in the Family. I feel like you could never get away with that, but maybe you can. And there's a show that I watched recently. It's out of Canada, and it's about, and I'm going to forget it. This is like this is what happens when you go off on a tangent. I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but you may know it. It's again, it's filmed in Canada. I think it's a Canadian show, and it's about an Asian family who runs a little grocery store. And have you seen? Do you know does this ring a bell?
Is it Kim Possible? Is that
it? I don't think it's I don't think it's Kim Possible. They make fun. I mean, they make fun of all of the woke culture. They make, but they make fun of everyone, and it's sort of this equal opportunity, sort of, slamming on all these sort of sacred cows, which is really refreshing. So, I hear about these shows and I think, oh, this would never be made today. And then I watch one that is. So there's still some risk takers out there. And my husband and I really enjoy the show. Obviously, I don't enjoy it enough to actually remember it. But to be honest with you, I don't watch a lot of modern shows. My husband was watching it, and I caught a little glimpse of it. But it was refreshing to see that is still possible, and that they were making fun of. I mean, they were making fun of Asians. They were making fun of the gay community, and they were making fun of oversensitivity, and and so it's a great show. I hopefully I'll remember it by the time we're done with this, but it is nice. It is nice to see that. But it's interesting what you were saying about how kids are different today. And, this is a parenting podcast, so I do want to talk a little bit about that, about, you mentioned like your kids are watching videos. Same with mine. They get on their tablets and they watch YouTube videos, and they, we have a lot of filters and we really watch what they're watching. But, they watch, this is the weirdest thing to me. They watch people playing video games. For the life of me, I could be 1,000 years old. I will never understand the attraction of that. And I'm sure my kids are the same age as yours. So, and I have boys. So, but I will tell you, I sort of insist on movie nights. I love movies so much. Obviously, when we were growing up, we didn't have YouTube videos and that kind of stuff. So I understand there's, again, more competition for their time and attention, but we make it kind of an event. And I'm really happy because they are seeing these movies that I think everyone should see, sort of classics, and Because I think it kind of makes you a more well-rounded person if you have some understanding of these classic movies. So I don't know, maybe it's that I throw candy at them that they sit down and watch these movies. But I do enjoy experiencing that with them. And I
I do
do
too.
think, yeah.
I
And
think, I mean, selfishly, it feels like I'm reliving my childhood in a good way.
yeah,
So
yeah.
there's sort of that aspect. But yeah, and I also think that just from an attention span point of view, I want my boys to be able to sit down, concentrate, enjoy the experience, and not have to run another room to check their phone or to check another, whatever they're, is capturing their attention. So I think that matters too. Whether whether our movie nights are enough to kind of stem that tide of instant gratification they get from their phones, I don't know, but it does help. And yeah, there are certain movies that have messages, and one of my favorite movies of all time, which was my dad's favorite movie, which is my child's middle name is Shane. It's a great Western from the
Oh,
1950s.
Shane, yeah.
And
Yeah.
that for boys to watch that movie, it is essential.
Yeah.
It's a story about sacrifice, about standing up for your fellow man, about staring down when you're afraid of something, fidelity. There's a temptation between Shane and the rancher's wife that could fall into something like an affair, but I think cooler heads prevail. Spoiler alert! But it's just got
Yeah.
so many different wonderful elements, and it's over 2 hours, and maybe that's attention span wise not the greatest thing for kids,
Yeah,
but
that's
my kids hung in there with it, and it's just a wonderful movie.
well, I think part of the problem too is that I mean they hung in on it. They hung in there because it's a great story. And when I talk about these movies, I mentioned Towering Inferno and The Hindenburg and Poseidon Adventure. Those aren't like, the yeah, it's not like a drama with great character development, but it has some, and you care about these. You actually grow to kind of care about these characters, and so in those days, I feel like a lot of those exciting action movies were they still did try, because I remember there's always an arc, right? It's the same thing where they get on the ship and everything's great, or they go to work in the big building and everything's great, right? And then the disaster happens. It feels like, but by the time the disaster happens, you know these people, and so I think we don't give kids enough credit. I think it's not that kids have shorter attention spans because they're on YouTube watching shorter videos or doing playing games all the time. The content isn't good. I don't have a long attention span when the content isn't good. So I think in movies where there is a little bit more character development, I'm often surprised that my kids do pay attention, and probably yours too. And that's a function of the movie being really good, I think. And maybe you disagree with me, but that's
No,
kind of my.
I agree. I think the art of storytelling has suffered some body blows in recent years. And I
Yeah.
also think that I almost feel like I'm an ambassador to movies. And I kind of felt when I first met my wife, she was not a movie watcher at all. And I felt this insane pressure. Well, if we're going to have a movie night together, besides it being like a romantic evening for us, it's something that I want to be really good. I don't want to kind of waste her
Yeah.
time with a mediocre movie. Then she's going, But I basically kind of inundated her with really good films, and I think it kind of turned her toward that whole process where, she knows it's going to be hopefully a fun experience. If I see I'm a film critic, I see a lot of terrible movies. I'm not dissuaded from the art just because I love what I do, but if I sat through 20 bad movies in a row, I think I'd dread number 21.
What is your idea of a good movie? Are there things it has to have?
Oh, there's no real checklist. I often at a screening, I bring a pad and paper, a pad and pen, and I try to take notes. And I love it when I just put the notepad down. And I'm like, I'm so wrapped up in the movie. I'm like, okay, I'll figure it out later. I'll write the notes later. I'll try to remember from my brain or something. Like when it takes me away. And this is a very odd example, but I'll throw it at you anyway. Recently, I had a kind of just a tough day, and I was exhausted, and I poured myself one single glass of wine just to kind of just chill out. And then I watched at random Roadhouse, which is an absolute slab of 80s cheese, likes of which I didn't remember because I haven't seen it in 30 years. And it was so absurd and so over the top and so ridiculous. And yet it leaned into every element of that. And I had a grand old time. My troubles just vanished. And ultimately, that's kind of why I do what I do and why people watch movies. They want to escape. They want to be entertained. They want to be distracted. Life is hard.
Right.
And if you can kind of take me away for 2 hours, that is just the most amazing thing. And Roadhouse is not technically a good movie. It's absurd. You could even say it's bad, but there is something about that film that is over the top and outrageous. And it's certainly R-rated. It's not for the kiddies, but I had a great time. So, as a critic, you can't ignore that. You got to ultimately say, was it fun or not? Were you looking at your watch, or were you just having a blast and laughing along with it?
Well, you mentioned, that's the job of movies, take you away, let you have some fun. But that is not happening as much now. We have a lot of lectures coming from Hollywood, and it's not just in the movies. It's also at award shows. That's probably why the ratings for award shows are in the toilet. But it's also in the movies. It's weaved into the movies, and even I feel like it's interesting now that sometimes I just watched that. There's a new HBO show called Mayor of. It's her name is Mayor. And she's in Pennsylvania. It's the character. It takes place in Pennsylvania. It's sort of typical cop murder kind of mystery. But it was very good. Kate Winslet stars in it. She's very, just very compelling. I thought her portrayal was very realistic. And then her daughter, they have, she's divorced and she has children, and one of her children has died. But then they made the daughter gay and in a relationship, and which is, to quote Seinfeld, not that there's anything wrong with that. But I feel like sometimes there really wasn't a very big, there was a weird story arc actually with the daughter and some alcohol involved and just some sort of bizarre behavior. But I didn't really feel like, I feel like sometimes they try to stick it in, they gotta like fit a quota. Every character they have to sort of have one of each characters. And that kind of gets tiresome, to be honest with you. Not that, every, like a character has to be gay and then has to have like a gay storyline, or that has to be filled. And so in some ways, maybe you could say it's actually refreshing that it wasn't made a big deal in the movie. But I do feel like in general, Hollywood lectures Americans, and again, both in storylines in the movies and in Hollywood. I mean, do you think Hollywood is sort of, I'm sure you do, I think we can agree on most of these things, but has lost its way? Has it forgotten that its main role is to entertain and take people away?
At times, yes. I mean, I think there's still a lot of good product out there that makes me excited to go watch it. I do think that there are certainly moments in a lot of programming, small screen, big screen, where there's either a colleague of mine used to call it the sucker punch, where it was sort of aimed at either mocking someone who was right of center or had a very overt message. To me, I call them lectures. I think that they stop the movie cold. And also, much worse, even if you agree with them, they often take you out of the movie. And just to give you a quick example, I just previewed a horror movie. It comes out in a few weeks. I won't show it. The embargo is still in place, so I can't say what it was. But the film features a very bad person. He may be sexually exploiting a child. Let's just give some context there. And then you see him get in his car and drive off. So it's his car. And what do you see on the bumper sticker of the car?
Of course.
Make America Great Again sticker. Now, you don't need that for this story. We already know this is a bad dude. It doesn't really add anything of consequence, but it immediately, at least to me, says they wanted to kind of make fun of a Trump supporter. They wanted to make a political statement. And they did so risking the fact that when you see it, you're kind of taken out of the experience. Because up until then, I'm watching a car drive away. The story is compelling. I'm hoping that the kids who are in harm's way get out safely. So it it was very typical, because you do see that quite a bit. And I think it does the story a disservice. It does the storytellers a disservice. And to me, like I said, I want to get lost in the story. I don't want to get involved and then get yanked out and then have to kind of work my way back in. Dazzle me, distract me, entertain me. That's all great. And, and I think that there are stories where you can weave in some commentary. I think that often makes it richer, even if I don't agree with it. The classic example is Dawn of the Dead, the horror movie from the 70s. There were images of these zombies walking around a mall. And it was the director's sly commentary about how consumerism kind of eats away at us and how we're all kind of zombies. We're walking. Like it was sort of brilliant. And I'm not an anti-capitalist guy. I don't care about that. But You know what? If you missed it, great. If you caught that little nuance, even better. It didn't stop anything. It just made it a little bit richer and more textured.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, though, to some degree, Americans, part of this, there's, you can't just get some popcorn, sit down and just, relax and I often after a day, I mean, this is my job. Politics is my job. It is your job to some degree. You follow this stuff and you're on, I follow you on Twitter and you comment on a lot of things. And at the end of the day, you talked about pouring yourself a glass of wine and watching a big old slice of cheesy 80s, movies, which was a great line. I love that line that you said, but there is some escapism there. And I feel like it's harder and harder to get away from some of the politics. And you've seen sort of this leftist takeover of higher ed over the years, big tech, obviously K through 12 education with critical race theory, and
sports.
You want some
forget sports.
100% sports, and like everything. I mean, you even have every major organization, like medical organization, they're all being taken over by sort of and every corporation out there is now, issuing woke statements about things. There's really no escape. And then it's frustrating, obviously, when you see it from Hollywood. And yesterday there was a pop star, Olivia Rodrigo. Am I saying that right, Christian? Do you know about this?
I vaguely heard that she was pitching for the vaccines, I believe.
Yeah, she was pitching. And, I think that the White House Director of Digital Strategy, Rob Flaherty, he's trying to influence young people, right? So they bring this young girl. I mean, she has the #1 album in the country. She's on this popular Disney Plus show. But, it seemed kind of like a stunt, a little bit like a stunt. And, sort of this idea that children are consistently influenced by big tech and consistently influenced by, these Hollywood starlets. And I agree that, that she probably does have some influence. But, what do you think about that when you have this sort of cross pollination between these really important subjects like, the vaccine and then, having this young girl at the White House trying to persuade young people, about these important public health issues?
Well, it's kind of why I do what I do, because I think that half the country should be represented from a cultural perspective and to be made aware of what's happening. When it comes to the vaccines, I've taken the vaccine in favor of the vaccine. I certainly don't want information about it or debates about it to be stifled. So I'm certainly against that. But there's a reason why people left of center took over Hollywood and used it to kind of spread their message, because it's often effective. Yeah. So it's not a surprise they're doing this. I find this one of the less egregious examples.
Right.
But what I would really like is that, and this is something that I kind of scream about from anywhere in any pulpit I can, is that I wish that people in Hollywood would stand up for free speech, for the ability to speak one's mind, to kind of blast big tech whenever it censors us, which is early and often apparently. I think that this particular creative community could speak almost as one in that direction without even being overtly political, because I think at its core, it's not a political issue. So, yeah, I mean, listen, there's a reason why all these messages we're talking about are happening, because they want to change our behavior. They want to change the way we vote. They want to change the way we think. It's all connected.
Well, the problem is that it's always, obviously I feel like they never have anything good to say about America. Certainly not talk about being a square in Hollywood if you say something good about America. But it's not just that. It's that they actively despise half of the country, mock them, and dismiss them and dismiss their wishes and their concerns, their religious beliefs, their own personal convictions, and again, sort of make fun of them for having them in the first place. I don't. Do you ever think that Hollywood will start to balance out? Do you think that stars will start to see, or entertainers will start to see, that they also have a role in helping the country, or are they just citizens of the world now?
No, it will not balance out. I don't think the stars will change their behavior until it hurts their bottom line. I do think that people who are on the right tend not to use the power of their purse or wallet to make change, which is a significant problem.
Yeah.
And there's no consequence to a celebrity embracing a hard left cause because they will not lose any work for it. They won't
Right.
lose any jobs for it. They only get benefits from it, if anything. So that's often, it's funny. Joe Rogan recently talked about Hollywood and why it thinks the way it does, and he kind of described when you kind of come to the town, there is an established groupthink there, and if you come in and kind of rattle the cage, you're done. And if you're a young actor or actress desperate to get that first big role to change their career and live your dreams out, what are you going to do? Are you going to say, that Trump guy isn't so bad? Are you going to say, gosh, I hate the fact that we're trying to stop
Well,
people.
yeah.
You get it.
And you have most of the stars who are in favor of Trump or who speak out or who aren't totally insane about Trump are those who are much older and, they're the types that, work when they want to and take roles that they want to. They certainly don't need these roles anymore. And they're secure. In other words, they're secure. They're not in a situation where they're working actors anymore or trying to, gain additional fame. They've sort of made it. And but I see that throughout all parts of the country. It isn't just, in very blue cities. I live in one, for instance. You are not welcome if you are not, at least in my, and I practically live in Portland, Oregon. Alexandria, Virginia is weirdly left. Very radically left. And if you don't toe the line, then you don't really you can be quiet. That's fine. You'll be more accepted into the society if you're quiet, but if you are loud. So I do think that Hollywood operates like many liberal towns. It's really no different. It's no worse. But I think the stakes are higher, obviously there, when there's so much money to be had. And look, you're an actor, you're a young actor. I'm sure you have friends that who are actors who stay very quiet. I certainly have a very good friend who was quite successful working actor in Hollywood, and she was terrified that someone would find out I was her friend. No, she was but she was very quiet about things. And I think that's, I think that's true. And especially now that cancel culture is so prevalent in our, in our society and in our country, it's sort of like, it's expanded beyond Hollywood and beyond the corporate world, which is kind of, I think, frightening for people.
Yeah, Hollywood is reflective of that, and it's the story that I write at least once a year, and it pains me that no one else is picking up on this theme. Is that for years and years, Hollywood would do movies and TV shows and plays about the blacklist, the Hollywood, the 1950s McCarthy era. And you could certainly understand why it impacted Hollywood directly. Famous screenwriters were punished as a result. It spoke to a lack of free speech and the ability to kind of think what you want to think. For every obvious reason, the industry is aghast at it, and we've seen it, in films like The Front and Guilty by Suspicion, Good Night and Good Luck. Fine, I get it. Let's talk about it. Let's revisit it. Let's learn some lessons from it. At the very same time, today's Hollywood actively discriminates if you like Trump, if you're right of center, if you're pro-life, if you're pro-Christian, in varying degrees. So, and about once a year, a major news outlet will basically acknowledge that and then just go on. Like, oh yeah, by the way, if you're right of center, you can't get work in Hollywood, or it's going to be much harder. And you replace that with any other group. If you were gay, if you were a Muslim, if you were part of any other individual group, and the same thing was said, it would be scandalous. There would be charges. There'd be investigations. We need to fix this. There'd be apologies. Never with this, though.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's truly amazing.
It really is. Their ability to see only what they want to see, or to hear only what they want to hear, or to even, the gaslighting of Americans, making, it's so obvious what they're seeing, and then making Americans feel like they're conspiracy theorists or seeing things that aren't there, it is pretty awful. I don't think that the industry, I mean, I think you're right that the industry won't recover, but I do think, and I suspect you feel the same way, that the proliferation of sort of streaming services and entertainment options are the thing that keep it in check. But even these new, they all kind of follow the same political line. They're all cranking out content that is hardly conservative, but sometimes there's a sort of a secret message in movies, or you'll watch it and you'll go, oh, well, goodness, that had quite the conservative. I remember when, there was that it was a cartoon, Invincibles, or what was it? It was the family of Incredibles, and people were saying, because at one point, it's so funny too, because conservatives, anytime they get like one line, I remember Robert Downey Jr., I think he wore a Cato t-shirt, and everyone was like, oh my God, we're so excited because we get crumbs all the time. But so the Incredibles, they had that line about like, you're special. It's okay to be special or something. He said something similar to that. And, sort of going against this idea of like, every kid is a genius and every kid is, perfect. And so, if there ever been movies, I'm sure there have, but do you have any movies that you can cite that do sometimes sneak in more, I don't know, free market ideas or conservative principles? Certainly, it'd be a shock if there was a vaguely pro-life movie or something. Is there any that come to mind? I don't mean to put you on the spot like that, but
no. Well, I mean, pro-life, you could look at Juno and Knocked Up as two examples that they decided to keep the baby in the story. It's key to it. And actually, some critics were aghast at those themes, by the way.
Right.
There's the first Ghostbusters had sort of a anti-authority message, which is interesting, and certainly you wouldn't quite get that today. A Quiet Place, the first film, much more than the second film, is a powerful tribute to families, to parents, to moms and dads who will do anything and use every creative resource at their disposal to protect their children. I think rom-coms are often incredibly conservative in that it's always boy meets girl, and they're going to the chapel. They're not going to go, have an open relationship or do a throuple thing. They want to be together at the end of that movie, right? I mean, it maybe coincidentally, that's why they don't make as many at the theatrical level anymore, because they don't want to do that story. I don't know, but those are a couple examples. Also, this is one I mention often because it didn't get much attention. It's called Still Mine. It's a very sweet love story about an older couple. James Cromwell, a very good actor, who's super progressive, is the star. I forget the female star. And his wife is getting older, and she may be having some dementia issues, and he's a builder. So he wants to make a house that would make it more amenable to her, where she could kind of live with him for a longer period before maybe her condition worsened. And all it is about him fighting the red tape and the bureaucracy. And he just wants to build the house that he knows how to do better than anybody. And in a way, it was sort of a sly anti-big government message, told by an actor who's far left.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think some of the older movies that I'm showing the kids, particularly some of the war movies, and you mentioned Shane, which have these used to be not ever considered right or left, but just principles you would want to teach your children, but still reaching back into the past. And The Right Stuff is a great example of a movie that my children love, about the first astronaut program, and it's such a great film because obviously it shows family life and obviously courage and exploration and excitement. And so, but that didn't have a political message at all. It was just, these are great principles to teach your child and great Americans to emulate. And nowadays, it's kind of sad that those movies, if they were made today, you would say, oh, they're really, covering some conservative principles where, those are principles we should all share. So anyway, it's interesting to think about that. What are some other resources parents can go to for good movies? There's Common Sense Media, but are there other, and obviously your website, but are there some other resources you suggest to people?
It's tough. Common Sense Media, by the way, although it does a lot of good things, it's certainly liberal in its approach. So just kind of know that going in. There are a couple of reviews I read that I thought were rather shocking in that it might have been an attack on No Safe Spaces, which is one of the best documentaries the last, 10 years.
Yeah.
And they were complaining about that because people on the left don't like free speech at this point, sadly.
Sure.
I hate to say that. I hate to say that out loud, but it's true.
Yeah,
it just is.
strange.
I think Dove has sort of certainly a very strong Christian view of entertainment, but I believe they have an online resource. I know Movie Mom. I used to know her back in my DC days, Nell Minow, who's a very sweet woman, and her website often will have commentary, but whether something is appropriate for children or not, she's left of center, but just so you know, but I think she's a pretty straight shooter. Otherwise, just read the reviews carefully. Usually like a Rotten Tomatoes will have like a bare bones description of why it's R-rated or why it's PG-13. They seem to have that at the very bare minimum. But, also reach out to your friends. I mean, that's one of the joys of online living is that if you're a parent and you know lots of fellow parents, just kind of float a movie that came out and say, hey, has anyone seen this? And often that kind of peer-to-peer feedback can be the most effective.
Well, look, I really can't end this without getting your thoughts on the Britney Spears issue. I'm half joking, but I'm also half not joking because it actually is everything having to do with Britney is pretty crazy, but this is a really serious issue. In fact, IWF is two of my colleagues at IWF, two lawyers on our staff, Jennifer Basaris and Inez Stepman, are going to be doing one of their programs at the bar about the sort of Team Britney versus Team Conservatorship issue. And this is what you do. You are in this, you're in the Hollywood bubble in a way, and reviewing everything that goes on there. Will you have any feelings on this issue? And for listeners who don't know, Britney Spears claims that she's sort of a hostage to this conservatorship, which is run by her father and a team of lawyers and other sort of people to protect her. And everybody can remember that Britney had a bit of a meltdown years ago. I mean, but it wasn't just, shaving her head. And she actually had locked herself in her home with her children. And she has, said she was going to self-harm. There's some pretty significant stuff going on with Britney. But, Christian, I'm just interested in any opinions you have on this issue.
Two quick thoughts. One, often with these high-profile cases, it can reverberate across the culture where it's just one person, one situation, but sometimes there is a domino effect, or it could have an impact far beyond the person itself. Number two, I don't exactly know why, but I have rigorously avoided this story. I think in part because there's a lot of celebrity attached to it, and one of the things I did when I went solo and left a couple of different organizations was I didn't want to do the gossipy, what is Justin Bieber up to these days stories and the Kardashians. I kind of made a personal vow to myself. And if you go to my website, I don't write on those stories. I don't kind of tweak them with my little news section on my sidebar. So even though I don't discount that there's worth to the story, for some reason, I have just aggressively not dug in, so I apologize profusely.
Okay, so I guess I'm not going to get anywhere if I ask you where you are on the Queen Meghan Markle argument, right? Okay, fine, I get it. And what is Justin Bieber up to these days, Christian? I'm just kidding.
I'm the last person to ask, though I'm also on a royal blackout. I just think the fact we're even talking about royalty in 2021 is I'm aghast at that.
You're an American after all, right? Why do we even care about this stuff? We fought a revolution so we didn't have to care about this stuff. Well, listen, Christian, I always love talking to you, and I could go on and on because I do love movies and I love everything you write and review. And I want you to mention to the audience where they can find you and give a plug for your podcast.
Sure. The website is hollywoodintoto.com. My work also appears at the Daily Wire, Newsbusters, justthenews.com, Real Clear Investigations. And I have a book coming out in January, and it is about woke Hollywood. So I can't tease it too much more than that because it's still a few months away. But it's a book that we need. Let's just put it that way. And if there were 20 books that came out before mine that addressed the issue, I'd be happy because I think people need to know what's happening in Hollywood. And just a quick final note for people who are right of center and care about the culture. Be culture warriors. And by that, I don't mean pick up a sword or a shield. I mean support good right of center art. Because if we don't support it, it's not going to happen. And because there are forces at play that don't want it to happen. And if we don't use our economic influence to kind of rise up and to kind of share the stories that aren't being told, they will never be told.
What a great way to end this. And I do hope people support Christian, his work, his efforts. He is, I think, the best, absolutely the best, and a good friend. He's a good friend of IWF. And he really will help you and guide you to better shows. He's very balanced. And I think Christian and I disagree on a lot of things. I poo-poo a lot. I think a lot more that he's very balanced in his reviews. He's also on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle? It's
at Hollywood in Toto. Got to keep that brand consistent.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And I hope you come back when you have your book out. I'd like to review it, but I'd also like to chat with you about it. So I hope you'll come back.
Oh, sounds great.
Great. Thanks, Christian. Thanks, everyone, for being here for another episode of the Bespoke Parenting Hour. If you enjoyed this episode or like the podcast in general, please leave a rating or review on iTunes. This helps ensure that the podcast reaches as many listeners as possible. If you haven't subscribed to the Bespoke Parenting Hour on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, please do so you won't miss an episode. Don't forget to share this episode and let your friends know that they can get Bespoke episodes on their favorite podcast app. From all of us here at the Independent Women's Forum, thanks for listening.